black coffee.
This is the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network. Coffee people talking to coffee people about coffee and things coffee adjacent. This episode of Coffee Memo is brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. Welcome to Coffee Memo with Rob Stephen, a podcast where we talk about coffee industry news and current affairs. This is episode 7 of Coffee Memo, and we have a special guest. I'll leave introductions to Rob, but the topics covered in this episode include, what else, the coffee market, including some historical context and just context in general. We also get to learn a few things about our guest. So Rob, for this episode, we're doing something special. We have a guest for the first time. Tell us who it is and why you asked him to be a guest on the show.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. So to give a little background, I've been trading for 15 to 18 years. Can't really say exactly when I started, but in that time, the whole time, I've been on the receiving end of a daily commentary on the market from a guy named Michael Nugent. And he is sort of a hero in the trading business in that everyone passes his commentary around and comments on it. It's usually the start of a lot of discussions. And I don't know Mike. I sort of reached out to him on a whim, and he was really generous enough to just say yes without really knowing. I've met him at a cocktail party once and said hi to him, And I guess for transparency's sake, I should say that we're only a customer of his in that we buy a market feed from him. So if you can imagine in a trading floor that the price of the C market is on the wall, we pay him for that, and that's it. But otherwise, we don't have any sort of working relationship.
Right.
But we had a really great discussion, and I'm excited for everyone to hear it.
Okay, cool. Let's go.
Mike Nugent, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So please tell our listeners who you are and what you do at MJN, or Michael J. Nugent Company.
Well, what am I? I guess from some descriptions, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I've been doing this for a long time, ever since college. My primary role is to work with the coffee industry in my particular realm. Price risk management is the polite way of calling what we call commodity trading. And I have been, again, involved in this since walking out of the doors of the university way back in the 1970s. And in the intervening years, have served as a member of the coffee committee of the Coffee Sugar Cocoa Exchange / New York Board of Trade / ICE for about 40 years. Recently left that role. I also served as a director of the Coffee Sugar Cocoa Exchange and of the New York Board of Trade. I was a member of both. Worked for big banks and brokers for my entire life until the big financial crisis came in the early part of the century. And in 2008, I left a major international bank as I watched Wall Street collapsing around me and decided I needed another job, and there were no jobs. So I decided to start my own firm. And so since 2008, I created MJ Nugent and Company. And why did we call it MJ Nugent and Company? Simply because I didn't think of a better name. And we're involved primarily in soft commodity trading and soft commodity hedge advisory. We have specialties in coffee, as you mentioned, sugar, cocoa, and cotton. We don't really, and some other foodstuffs, but we don't get too far outside of our lane.
That's great. It's interesting. At 2008, we switched trajectories. I had my own company until that financial crisis, and then decided to go work for people again. So we.
Well, you work for a fine organization. I've got to tell you that I met your big boss, your chairman, Sonny, at a World Cocoa Symposium some years ago. He gave what was to him was probably his stump speech, but to me it was just an absolutely incredible talk. He held my attention. He spoke about everything from price of cocoa and cocoa farming to the water table in China and how it was changing and why it was all important. He's a big thinker, and I like big thinkers. And
huge thinker, yeah. He's
he
a walking encyclopedia and really values lead. So he's an inspiring guy. I've had a chance to talk to him a few times. It's really great. Well, speaking of inspiration, the reason that I asked you here today, we are all big consumers of your daily commentary, and it's helping us to navigate these turbulent times. So we thought it would be great to hear from you, not so much for your advice on the day-to-day, but I really wanted to dig into how you think about things, and if you are able to sort of talk about just the way that you're looking at the problems that we have today, and maybe it would give our listeners just a little bit of guidance or a roadmap on how to move forward. Most of them are looking for holistic ways to think about, when to fix or how the market is going. So I try and give information about here's how you think about things. And one of the first things I always talk about is my daily news diet. And I'm imagining you have a pretty sophisticated one. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about yours, and then if you think there's a way that people could replicate it without maybe thousands of dollars in feed fees.
I think, my blessing, if I have one in life, was I learned to read as a very, very young child, and I was never a terrific student. I did manage to, work my way through an education, but I always loved to read, and I read constantly. I read everything. I mean, I'm the proverbial guy that reads the back of the cereal box. And I know, I'll look up what riboflavin actually is. Not that don't test me. I'm not sure I remember, but these markets are literally the condensation of all kinds of information that's available in the public domain. Part of it, aside from the chore of gathering information, is, in my view, is trying to think about it independently and trying to think about it in the absence of the opinions of others. And that is not to say you ignore the opinions of others. I do not. But I try to isolate what other people are saying and come up with my own conclusions. Now that can be very humiliating. That means you're going against the crowd. But by the same token, to me, it's the only honest way to do this. And occasionally there'll be a flash of brilliance, and I'll be right, or whoever thinks this way will be right, and that's the psychic income I need to continue in the quest. But it's thinking is hard. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you think about it. It's always hard.
Sure.
And this is not an easy. These are not easy puzzles to figure out. Nor should they be. There's an awful lot at stake. I'm not sure I've answered your question completely, but my advice to anyone is just read as many newspapers as you can. When I say newspapers, whatever they are today, I'm not sure they exist anymore. Periodicals, let's call them periodicals. That's better. And just figure it out. Read or listen to. Know what the weather is like, not in your neighborhood, but across the country. Just know it. Just file it away. Travel as much as you possibly can and get to know people and ask their opinions. That has given me. I mean, I've got so many friends around the world, especially in the coffee, in the coffee orbit. I can pick up the phone or send a text message to someone who I know and trust, and I know I'll get a straight answer from them to a question.
Yeah, no, I think perspective and having a good network are two invaluable things, and they have to be built. You're not born with those, right? So you have to create them. I think the word, well, there's probably many words to describe this market, but volatility has to be in the top three for what we're experiencing these days. And when I look at the roasters that we deal with, and even a lot of the suppliers we deal with, since they've started, which even could be, more than 10 years ago, because there's a lot of relatively young people in the industry, it's been a low volatility carry market. And now suddenly we find ourselves in an inverted market with a lot of volatility. And it creates a lot of uncertainty about how to proceed. And without sort of saying this is what you should do, it's what kind of advice do you find yourself giving to people in terms of how to think about these kinds of situations?
Well, I think it's important to understand understand, where you are. Are we in a normal kind of a marketplace, and should we expect this kind of volatility to continue? I think is a reasonable question, and I would answer the first one and say no. Obviously, we're not in a normal type of market, and I guess the next question that arises from that is, well, gee, everything's changed. It's going to be like this forever, and I would counter that by saying, well, understand how we got here first, right? We know
Right.
where we are before you're convinced you know what the future looks like. You better take a good look at history and figure out what it was like before. Coffee traditionally or historically has always operated in a surplus. And
Mhm.
so that's why we're not in a surplus now. Obviously, that's why the market's inverted. So the only argument I can think of for the market remaining inverted for an extended period of time, and I won't let you choose. I'll choose what extended means, but the only excuse I can give you for that would be that the financial incentives of high prices will not impact production, or regardless of the financial incentives of high prices, Mother Nature will not allow for the increase of production. Now, I can't speak for Mother Nature, but again, history suggests that there's an average, a mean of weather that
Mhm.
we are shifting from. I'm not a non-believer in climate change, but markets and natural processes tend to revert to a mean. They tend to revert to a level of a band of normal.
Mhm.
And if one is fairly evaluating the coffee market today, it is really pretty far from the normal. It is pretty far from the mean.
Sure.
So I would rather, forced to wager or forced to predict, I would rather predict that we are more likely to revert to the mean than we are to get further away from it
Mm.
over the next year or two.
Right.
And what backs that up from the practical side of it is that farmers have every incentive in the world to take really good care of their crops, and to apply fertilizer, and to spend money perfecting their farming practices, and to buy equipment. And that being, another mean is human nature, and that speaks to the economic equation, of the reversion to the mean. Human
Mhm.
nature is pretty reliable.
We
So
have a saying in coffee that the cure for high prices is high prices. Do you think that
yeah,
applies in this case?
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. You can say that in every commodity.
Mm-hmm.
Every commodity where people have where people are part of the natural order of things. Coffee doesn't grow just wild out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. These are not like fish stocks. Where you're dependent upon the natural procreation of fish. This is stuff that we plant. This is stuff we care for. It wouldn't exist in the quantities that it exists in were it not for the hand of man.
Right. So I know from reading your writings that you're very interested in history. You
I
reference it
am.
a lot. So I was wondering if you can point to any times in history where we've had similar levels of volatility and uncertainty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got some charts here in front of me someplace here. Let me find one here. If I go back to, by the way, most of the major moves we've had in coffee historically have been related to weather.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Frost in Brazil and
and
such. Yeah.
and there've been, but there's also been some really interesting political shenanigans that have also had a play in supply. When I say political, they had their basis in pure politics.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about that perhaps in a bit, but let me answer your question. In the 1970s, we had the first modern big coffee market, and that was predicated by the frost in Brazil in July of 1975. And then in the mid 1980s, we had a drought in Brazil that caused a big spike in the market. And then we had another frost, in, I think it was 1994. Then we had a drought, a drought again in 1998. And then we went into a long, protracted period of oversupply. We had record crops after that in Brazil, and Vietnam started to come online, and the market went into the doldrums from about 1998, 1999, all the way until 2010. Well, it started an uptrend, in 2002, but we got our next big hit was we had Roya in Central America and Colombia, and we started to recognize the global warming as being an issue. We had that big spike, and then we shifted over to Robusta consumption started to pick up. Vietnam really got into its prime, 13, 14, and then we had another drought, and then a drought in Vietnam, and then another drought another drought in Brazil, and of course we had the issues with El Nino, that impacted the Vietnamese crop. So it's almost always been a weather related
Right.
market. It's man fighting weather, man fighting nature, try to bring supply on.
And I assume
With a couple of noted exceptions.
sure. And I assume the political shenanigans you're talking about are the withdrawal from the ICO.
Well, let's go further back than that, and no one seems to remember this, but the ICO, the initial International Coffee Agreement, the first ICA, was really, in my view, a product of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a coincidence that the first ICA came into being after Fidel Castro rolled into Havana.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this is in the Kennedy administration. We started something called the Alliance for Progress under the Kennedy administration, and that was an outshoot, a legal outshoot of the Monroe Doctrine, if you will. And it was an attempt to persuade our neighbors in Central and South America not to fall in line with the Soviet Union and not to fall in line with communism. And the International Coffee Agreement was carefully crafted to offer not blanket price supports, but price or supports for producers on a allocated basis, giving them giving them stamps so they could have a quota, if you will, to sell coffee into the Western world, into Europe, primarily Europe and the United States. That of course created a tremendous amount of leverage for the West with Latin America. So that's perhaps that's too frank a description of what was going on in the hushed corridors of diplomacy, but that, in my view, that's exactly what was going on. Nor is it a coincidence. The ICA was dissolved when the United States walked out of the meetings in London and said, we're no longer members.
Right.
We're no longer in agreement. And when did that happen? The year after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right. Had served its purpose.
We'd served its purpose. Yeah.
Yep. No, I think context is everything. So that's a great piece of information. I noticed in your sort of recitation of all the different crises to hit coffee that you had one for each time, right? There was a weather, it was a drought, it was a this, it was a that. As I sit here having traded in this environment along with everyone else, I've got tariffs. I've got multiple years of less than expected crops. I've had a logistics crisis coming out of COVID. It's been a lot of things. EUDR, right? A lot of things all at once. Is that something that you've seen before, or is that a new sort of element for you?
Yeah. Forgive me. I was using, I was doing fine art with a crayon here. There's always like I said, there's always the major moves have always come out of weather.
Right.
Up moves, right?
Yeah.
Down moves, different. but there's all kinds of drama that happen, in between, in those valleys between the spikes.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, logistics, COVID. I mean, it's always been a wild ride. You have to come to work every day. You don't make, this is not a one decision market.
Right.
Never has been.
Nope. We spent a lot of time talking about supply, especially on the trading side, because it's sort of, I think there's an assumption that the market will be there to sell to. The supply side is the part that seems variable. Do you give a lot of thought about the variability of the demand side?
Well, if there's variability in demand, it has tended to be on the positive side.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about, changes in demand, it's usually on the rate of change higher,
Mm-hmm.
not lower. It's an interesting question at this point, something to really think about, and it makes me wonder with retail prices of coffee as high as they are today at record levels, historically high levels, and with consumers as stretched as they are, and I believe they are, especially at the lower income level. I know it sounds contradictory when we've got record stock market prices and S&Ps are going up, blah blah blah. But that's not everybody.
No,
That's a
it's not.
segment of the That's only a segment of the population. There are a lot of people in this in this country, in our country, but around the world who are working paycheck to paycheck. Is no, and speaking of this country, it's not it's provable that credit card balances are very very high. It's provable that defaults on auto loans are very very high. A lot of cars have been repossessed, and
Mm-hmm.
these are the folks that are that aren't living at the pinnacle. They're working their way up, and they drink coffee
They do.
like everyone else.
They do.
And it's no accident that great retailers like McDonald's are promoting not happy meals, but bargain meals. You
Yep.
get they know what their customers want and need. It's no accident that we've seen such a turnover in the executive suites in many coffee related companies.
Yep.
These have not been the best of times in spite of the historic prices.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do want to ask about the sort of winners and losers aspect on that. But for those who don't have the privilege of reading your daily commentary reports, you famously track the price of the house blend at Kirkland or at your club store. Today's was particularly alarming because they were actually out, and then the Colombian was through the roof. But I've really enjoyed that tracking that you've done on that. I know it's just a personal data point, but I thought it was great.
Well, thank you. I'm a big fan of Costco. I think that they do a wonderful job as a retailer. I don't like shopping, but it's kind of a habit I've gotten into. Every couple of weeks, I'll wander into the Costco and get a little exercise walking around, and I always check the coffee aisle and I take pictures of the coffee prices just for the hell of it. Been doing that for about a year or so, especially since the high prices. But yeah, I did notice yesterday that they were out of their house blend in the Costco store that I shop in. I've never seen that before, and I wondered why.
It's hard to imagine them running out of coffee, so that's interesting.
But they did have Folgers. They had Folgers at a premium to the Colombian Supremo Kirkland, which I also found interesting.
It's hard to know how much is in people's pipelines and how far forward they are with stuff. It's production's so staggered. It's interesting. So going back to what we were just talking about, obviously I don't want you to name names, but if you think about sort of segments or sectors, as you look at it, do you see sort of winners and losers or who's handling this period of uncertainty the most adeptly?
How do we do that? How do I answer that question without naming names?
Yeah.
I was just in Switzerland at the Swiss Coffee Exporters Association annual meeting, which I attend every year. And I had an opportunity to chat with some of the major roasters, and they're friends. They're people I know, and I can speak off the record with them. But without naming names, I started my conversation with all of them by saying, under normal circumstances, in this industry, to be a roaster is a really nice thing
Mm-hmm.
because people treat you well. Everybody wants to be your friend. You're buying a lot of coffee. I wouldn't trade places with you today for everything.
Yeah.
This is an awful job you've got.
Right.
They all looked they all looked rather drawn. It's been
Yeah.
a very difficult period.
Conversely, to the folks that you talk to on the supply side.
Well, look, they're also they're on the supply side, starting from the dealers, the importers
Mm-hmm.
who are supplying the roasters. They're strapped by the inverted market.
Right.
They're strapped by the relatively high cost of money.
Mm-hmm.
They're also strapped by sheer limits of capital that they're able to obtain from their banks. It's not an easy time. This is the golden age of being a farmer,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But they've also faced higher costs of fertilizer, etc. So I guess relatively they've had the best of it, but they deserve to have the best of it once in a while because normally they're the people that pay. They're the people that really pay the price for the rest of us.
Yes.
The producers.
They would need to have a long upside for it to be anywhere near even,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
So both Mike, Fergie here, my producer, and I are big fans of your writing. Both of us are amateur writers and been admirers of your writing. And just wondering if you have a writing background and do you enjoy writing as part of your day-to-day job?
Yeah, funny. I went back to college kind of late. I got a bad start in college and didn't do a lot. But in my mid 20s, I went back and got my degree. And by accident on the campus, I one of the courses I had to take was a journalism course. That was an elective that I chose, and part of the requirements of the journalism course was that you had to work for the campus newspaper. And I wandered into the campus newspaper office to volunteer to try to write some stories. And I walked into a political maelstrom. The editor of the newspaper was leaving school, and they had to elect a new editor in chief of the newspaper. And I was young, a little older than these rest of the kids, and kind of quietly sat in the back of the room and just listened to people cut each other's throats and campaign for this job as editor. And I couldn't figure out why they were so intense about it. And then somebody talked about the full scholarship that was attached to the editorship. And I realized, I said, holy cow. And I was poor. I was dirt poor. I didn't have any money. And I said, wow, it's full scholarship. So I just, I watched for a while and I casually dropped my name into the hat for the editorship's job. And nobody knew me, again, because I was kind of a new guy and older. And, so out of, they were so busy, again, killing each other that I got elected to edit the editorship. And I fell into it and I got the scholarship and I enjoyed it and I worked very hard. And as I was graduating, I needed to get a job, and I had a job interview at Merrill Lynch, and I accepted a job as a trainee at Merrill. But before I left the campus, I was at the president of the university's home for a big Christmas party. I graduated mid-year, and one of the members of the board, trustees of the university, came up to me and introduced herself. She said, "You're Mike Nugent." I said, "Yes." She said, "You're the editor of the newspaper." I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I've really enjoyed reading your editorials and the way you've changed the newspaper." And she said, "I'm a trustee of the university." I said, "Yes, I know, ma'am." And she said, "Well, I'm also a trustee of Columbia University, and I've shown your work to some of my colleagues at Columbia, and we're prepared to offer you a full scholarship to the journalism school at Columbia." Yeah, and I said, "Wow."
Road not taken, huh?
Now here's a guy who, again, I had to scrape my way to get my bachelor's degree, And I said, holy cow, and I couldn't do it. I didn't, because it was a full-time job, the graduate school of journalism. And I didn't have any money to eat. I didn't have any money for rent. I didn't have anything.
Right.
And I said, I couldn't do it. I have to take a job. So I took the job with Merrill, and but I continued to enjoy writing. I've had some Walter Mitty moments. I went off to, I covered the America's Cup in Perth, Australia, when the U.S. lost the America's Cup, and they regained it in Perth. I went over to Australia for complicated reasons as a journalist to get away from the United States for Christmas. I've done stuff like that. And, I've written, and I've enjoyed it. I like writing, but more than writing, I like thinking.
Yeah. No, that's clear. It's clear in your writing. Here on the trading floor, we have a lot of your favorite quotes that we, in times during the day where we'll get your report and then people will randomly burst out laughing. My favorite of the recent past has been when you said someone had predicted 10 of the last 7 bull markets. That was one of my favorites. So.
Hey, look, Rob, very, very little of very few of my quotations are original. I mean, this stuff you pick up over a half a century of doing this. You'll hear a lot of very interesting things. So.
Yeah, it's a good one either way. So last question I want to ask you, and you can sort of make this a twofer. Do you have any parting advice for small roasters who are trying to navigate this market? And also, can you recommend any books or movies that you enjoy that would help provide some guidance or context in these times?
Books and movies. One book. One book. It was written in the mid 1800s by McKay, MCKAY, and it is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. It is a book on economics and a book on human psychology, and nothing has changed. Mm-hmm. Nothing has changed.
People are people.
So Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And of course, for films, there's nothing better than Trading Places with Eddie Murphy.
That's our favorite here. I can't believe you just said that. We make all the new traders watch it.
That's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful film.
Yeah.
Look, advice to roasters. My advice to roasters is the advice I'd give anyone that was in business, whether they were roasting coffee or making pies. Produce quality, maintain your integrity, do what's right, treat your customers as the most important thing you have. They can go away, if you don't treat them properly. But to your own self, be true, and things will work out.
Words to live by. Mike Nugent, thank you very much for your time. You've been really generous.
Thank you.
Just thank you for spending some time with us.
Well, thank you very much, Rob and Mike. It's a great honor, and I don't do this very often. So thank you. Ask me back again. Maybe I'll have something new to say.
Will do. The honor is ours. Thanks, Mike.
You've been listening to Coffee Memo with Rob Stephen. Executive producer for the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network is me, Mike Ferguson. Our Coffee Memo theme music is Jealous Dogs by the Pretenders. If you know, you know. If you don't know, ask. If you've enjoyed this or any podcasts on the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, please do all the things like, subscribe, tell 3 friends. Right now, I'll wait. You'll find a link to our listener survey in the show notes. Please take the survey.
Please, I'm begging you.
And remember 2 things. You can always email us at theexchange@kavoya.com, and Black Coffee is performed by the one and only Ella Fitzgerald.
That sounds amazing.
I'm not even talking yet.
Oh,